we are going to draw a basic graph. So we're going to translate the unit circle. So make sure that you have your unit circle available or a picture of it. And I had to put 2 pieces of graph paper together. If you see that here, just because I want to make sure that it's large enough for you to see. So maybe for your first time that you draw this, you might want to do the same. Because I don't want to have to squeeze things in. Okay, so here we go. Right, this little dot right here is going to be my origin, and I'm going to draw my x-axis. So go ahead and draw the x-axis. And during this whole video, you will probably have to stop and pause and rewind it. But the more that we draw it, the more comfortable you will get with it. And then we're going to draw the y-axis here. Okay, so this is the x. Up here is the y. Let me zoom out a little bit so you guys can see it better. Okay, so the first ones that we're going to start with are going to be the 6th. So take a look at your unit circle here. Okay, this one is going to be 0 right here, and we're going to go through quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, we're going to go around the circle this way, and we're going to count by 6th. Okay, but we're always going to simplify. So make sure that we'll say it together. I'll do it slowly. Okay, so we'll start here. The next line, which I'm going to skip 2 because we're going to have to put some stuff in between for some of them. This is 1 pi over 6. We're going to go to the next one. Is going to be 2 pi over 6. So here's 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, which simplifies to pi over 3. We're going to move up to the next one. 3 pi over 6 right here. 3 pi over 6 simplified is going to be pi over 2. Let's do our marks here. Next one is going to be over here. 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. We're going to go here to the next one. 5 pi over 6. Next one down here is 6 pi over 6, which simplifies to just pi. Okay, here's going to be my next line. 7 pi over 6. And then we go down again here. 8 pi over 6, which is 4 pi over 3. Okay, then we're going to go over here. So 9, so this is 7, 8, 9 pi over 3. Sorry, 9 pi over 6, which is going to be 3 pi over 2. We're going to keep going. Notice I didn't even make it long enough. Just fine. I will continue it. It's for you. And you won't have to make this large all the time. Again, I'm just doing this for teaching purposes so that you can see it really well. Okay, so where did we stop? Let's go back to the beginning. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 8 pi over 6, 9 pi over 6, right? And then we go here to 10 pi over 6, which is going to be 5 pi over 3. We go to the next one, right? 11 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6. And then we go to the last one, which is going to be 12 pi over 6, and that simplifies to 2 pi. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to count. So take a look again at your unit circle. The first one we're going to do is 1 pi over 4, and it's in between pi over 6 and pi over 3. So right here on my xy axes, let me put an x here. Okay, it's right in between, look at your circle, pi over 6 and pi over 3. So I'll put a line there, and I'm going to put, my little pencil ran out here, pi over 4. Okay, then we go to the next one, so that's 1 pi over 4, then 2 pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 is the same as pi over 2. Then we go to 3 pi over 4, and 3 pi over 4 is in between 2 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 6. Okay, so there's 3 pi, that's 3 pi over 4, to put it down a little bit, right? And then 4 pi over 4 is the same as pi. Then we have 5 pi over 4, which is in between 7 pi over 6. So 5 pi over 4. 6 pi over 4, which is the same, right, as 3 pi over 2. 7 pi over 4, which is in between 5 pi over 3 and 11 pi over 6. So right there, 7 pi over 4, right? And then we come back around to 8 pi over 4, which is the same thing as 2 pi. Okay, so now we have all of our, we're working here, right, with quadrants 1 and 4. Now we're going to run all the positives. Okay, so now we're going to move to the negatives. And the negatives are the same exact thing here as you have in the positives, just backwards. Okay, so let me zoom in here so we can follow it. So I'm going to skip 2 again, keep it consistent. So we got negative pi over 6, right? Negative, I'm going to do the 6 first, pi over 3, right? Negative pi over 2, negative 2 pi over 3, negative 5 pi over 6, negative pi, and I see I'm going to have to put more space in here too, negative 7 pi over 6, negative 4 pi over 3, right? Negative 3 pi over 2, negative 5 pi over 3. Let me just finish this. Ran out of space again. So I'm at negative 5 pi over 3, negative 11 pi over 6, and the last one is going to be negative 2 pi. Okay, great. So let's make sure. Okay, so go around your unit circle, and we'll look at it at the same time, right? We'll go here. Negative pi over 6, negative pi over 3, negative pi over 2, negative 2 pi over 3, negative 5 pi over 6, negative pi, negative 7 pi over 6, negative 4 pi over 3, negative 3 pi over 2, right? Negative 5 pi over 3, negative 11 pi over 6, and negative 2 pi. So now I'm going to go back and we're going to put the fourths in, right? So in between the negative 6 and negative 3, I'm going to put negative pi over 4. In between negative 2 pi and negative 5 pi over 6, I'm going to put negative 3 pi over 4. Okay? In between 7 pi over 6 and 4 pi over 3, I'm going to put negative 5 pi over 4. Sorry for my messiness here. And then in between negative 5 pi over 3 and negative 11 pi over 3, we're going to put negative 7 pi over 4. Okay, so that's the x-axis. I'm going to zoom out here so you can see the whole thing. Hopefully you can see the whole thing here. Okay, so now let's do the y-axis. Now, if you look at your unit circle and you look at the y-axis, look at this point up here, it's going to be 1. All right, so to make a really nice clean sine and cosine graph, we're going to break this up by quarters, okay, because I don't want to make my 1 right here. Okay, we'll break it up by quarters. So I have space here, so I'll just do this. So I'll make this part right up here, right, 1/4. This one will be 1/2. This one will be 3/4, and the one up here will be 1. Okay, and then we're going to go back the other way, right? Negative 1/4, negative 1/2, negative 3/4, and negative 1. And there you have your basic graph. So we'll be drawing this a lot. There's a lot of online tools that we can use too, and I'll try to embed those. I have one that's already embedded